Great pleasure to start off this summit and to kick off this new virtual summit that we're doing here with Dr. Steven Levitt, who is the best-selling author of the Freakonomics series. And I am so excited to hear from him today because so much has been changing in the country. So again, you can ask discussion questions and stuff. We'll be doing some Q&A there too at the end. But I think one of the things that I just want to say about him is that he's a professor at the University of Chicago's economic department. And one of the things that I thought was very impressive was to receive the highly esteemed John Bates Clark Medal for being the most influential economist in America under the age of 40. So, and that's pretty much equivalent to like a Nobel Prize there. So it's wonderful. I'm sure we've all heard about him. We've seen his books. And if you've traveled in airports, they're always there and they're around. So with no further ado, I'm going to actually turn it over to Stephen. And thank you all for joining. And I look forward to coming back on stage a little later.
Thank you, Kelly. So there I am. Hello, everyone. We're not exactly in Orlando, but it's good to be here virtually. And I want to start, there'll be plenty of time for questions later. Let me start by telling a quick story. So back in the day, I used to do consulting with big companies. This must be about 10 years ago. I was at one of the biggest retailers in the United States. And it was my first day with them. And so I was being introduced to all the top people and the top data people. And the thing that was really, they were really excited about was that they were going to introduce like a frequent flyer card, a frequent purchaser card. And they had invested $300 million in this program. And they were convinced it was going to be the salvation of what was at that time a struggling retailer. So I was just in the mode of asking questions. And I said, well, so tell me a little bit more about this program. I said, well, people will have a card, they have to sign up for the card, and then when they do that, every time they make the purchase, they'll get the equivalent of 1% back on any future purchase. And I kind of thought, being an economist, I kind of thought, well, that doesn't exactly sound like 1% back. Doesn't sound like it's the kind of thing that's going to save the company. And I said, why do you think that, well, what effect do you think this will have? And they said, we believe this is going to increase our revenues by 10%. And I said, really, 10%? That seems pretty extreme. I said, why do you think this is better than just lowering prices by 1%? Because lowering prices by 1%, that'll have no impact at all. This is a cash back program. This is going to change everything. And I said, but I'm really confused. Why do you think that this is going to have such a big impact? Because like economically, theory-wise, you wouldn't think it should be any better, probably worse than giving people cash back because they have to wait a long time to buy it again. And they said, well, because we ran a randomized experiment. And my eyes got wide open because this was a firm that didn't seem that good for my first initial interaction with them. And I was really surprised that they had run a randomized experiment. I said, so you ran a randomized experiment where you gave people this frequent flyer card and overall firm revenues jumped by 10%. I said, yeah, that's what the experiment showed. And so I just didn't seem possible. So I just kept on asking questions. I said, so just let me ask you a little bit. So how did you find the people? I guess you have a credit card right now that people have. So you must have maybe sent letters to people in the mail who had your credit card. They said, yeah. And I said, I guess it's a randomized experiment. So you divide it into a treatment group and a control group, 50-50. I said, okay. And I'm guessing what happened next is that a bunch of people who got that letter inviting them to be in the treatment group, a bunch of them never got back to you. And, maybe 15% of the people said they wanted to be part of to get this cashback card. They said about 10%. 10% did. And then what you did is you waited maybe 3 months, and then you added up all of the sales of the people, that 10% of the people who had signed up for the frequent flyer card, and then you compared how much they bought at your store to the people who were in the control group. They said exactly. And they bought 10% more. Yes, and we're so excited, and that's why we invested $300 million in this, and our ROI is going to be like 5 to 1 given our results. And I said, how hard would it be do you have access to those data now? And these were the top data people at the company. And sure. I said, could I just, like, is there someone here who could go and run one little number for me? And they said, yeah. I said, could someone just go and just find the 90% of the people who got invited to be in the treatment group and who didn't want to be in the treatment group? And I actually have a prediction. And the prediction is that those people bought about 1% less than the people in the control group. Like, why would you say that? They're the same as the control group. I said, well, maybe they're not. And so if someone could run that, that'd be great. So about 15 minutes later, one person came back in the room and said, okay, so I ran those numbers, and you're exactly right. The people who were invited to be in the treatment group but didn't get a card, their sales were 1% lower than the people in the control group. And I said, so do you understand that means that your card didn't work at all? That 10% of the people increased their purchases by 10% and 90% reduced it by 1%. And so actually on net, it had no effect. Like, what are you talking about? They said to me, what are you talking about? We did a randomized experiment, and the people who got the card, their revenues went up by 10%. I said, yeah, but that's not how randomized experiments work. They said, yes, it is how randomized experiments work. Anyway, so the day, came to an end, and we didn't resolve that issue, but they did hire me to work for them. And so I told my team, hey, look, we really got to explain to this company, they're wasting $300 million on this rollout of this card, when the only reason that they think it works is they ran a completely flawed randomized experiment. They didn't think about the fact that when you run a randomized experiment and people don't want to, and you have a treatment group and a bunch of people opt out, that you got to take the whole treatment group against the whole control group. I was like, the easiest, simplest thing in the world. So I said, look, just put together a 5-page PowerPoint presentation that just explains it. There's obviously some confusion. So we put together that PowerPoint presentation, and we sent it to them. And they said, look, I don't know what's wrong with you guys. You're like supposed to be good academics, but you don't understand. We did a randomized experiment. Like, you guys don't understand. So I was frustrated, but I said, look, we got it. This is super important. There's $300 million that they're about to waste on an advertising campaign. We have to get through it. So my team put together, I said, look, we put together a 5-point PowerPoint presentation. Let's just put together a 50-page one. Let's just walk them through everything you could possibly not understand about this thing. And we did it. And we sent it to them. And they said, why, we're paying you all this money. Why do you keep on sending us these stupid PowerPoint presentations that are totally wrong? And we would argue back and forth with them. And then just to show you how crazy business is, it was finally decided, since we believed that they were totally misinterpreting their experiment and they believed they're interpreting it wrong, right? They were interpreting it right, that we would have it decided by the CEO, with no data science background at all. He would be the judge and the jury to decide who was right. And so we literally went and we sat down in front of him, and they gave their side of the case, and we gave our side of the case, and everyone looked at them to determine whether or not the results had shown that indeed this card had been a miracle or not. And he very hesitantly kind of mumbled a little bit, and then he said, well, I kind of think I'm with Professor Levitt on this one. Okay, which was amazing because it was going to save them $300 million in what was going to be a completely failed rollout of a card. To which immediately the people on the other side said, well, the randomized experiment had nothing to do with why we were pushing this project anyway. We have a bunch of other reasons that are much more important than that. So despite the fact that all of the evidence they had suggested this card would have no impact, and despite the fact in the end that the CEO had voted on our side and acknowledged that it would have no impact, they went ahead and they spent $300 million on the rollout, and just as expected, they saw no impact on their sales. Just an indiscernible increase in their sales. And this retailer is, if not currently bankrupt, really, really close to bankrupt. One of the formerly great companies of this country. So why do I tell the story? I tell this story because I think it is so indicative of when I experience the world and I go out in business or just in life, I think the level of data proficiency and fluency in our country is abysmal. It's really an embarrassment. And it is my belief that there's virtually nothing more important we could teach children, our current generation of children, than to be fluent with data, understand data, to know the difference between correlation and causality, to understand randomized experiments and the pitfalls of randomized experiments, and the difference between a randomized experiment and an epidemiological study where you observe people, to frankly just to be able to ask good questions and then to assemble a pile of data and understand that data is dirty and has to be cleaned, and to do simple analysis and visualization to try to understand the world around. To me, that is a baseline skill for functioning in a modern economy, and it's one that very few people have. Okay? So that's my belief, that we have an obligation to our children to be teaching data science. I would argue that in reality, we are essentially not even trying to teach data science. That we have something like, sorry, my battery, believe it or not, I've plugged in my battery, I apologize. Okay. We are not even trying to teach our kids data science. We talk about data science, so we generate some data. So on our Freakonomics Twitter feed, we put out a survey to people, and this is obviously not a random sample. These are the kind of nerdy people who, number one, listen to Freakonomics Radio, and number two, are willing to take some time to do our survey. But we asked them about the kinds of skills and things that they use, and what kind of training they had gotten in school. And virtually none of them had received any kind of data science training in school. And then we went ahead and we looked at on what kind of math stuff was being taught in math. And virtually no statistics even is being taught. Now, I'm not really talking about statistics when I say data science, because I think that most of statistics that's taught now is actually kind of an older version of statistics, which is very theoretical, very abstract, not really about data so much, but about almost what you do when you don't have data, right? When you have distributions and you want to make, asymptotic kind of assumptions. But even among general students, the level of taking statistics as in part of the math course is something like 7% in our data. And then we went to the U of C and the applicants at the University of Chicago, and we looked at the very elite. How many of them are being exposed to things like statistics? And there again, the amount of time, even among these elites, the number of years they were doing in data-related subjects was, maybe 10% of the math they were doing. If I try to do a rough calculation based on all this of the amount of the day that is spent by our current high school students doing data-related activities at school, my guess it's about 5 minutes a day, and that which is being done almost exclusively through the science track. It's interesting that, although to me it seems more logical that we would be integrating data science into the math track, that in practice it has really been subjects like biology. As an example, AP Biology was completely redone maybe 3 or 4 years ago with a new emphasis on data. So it's not impossible to bring in data. Okay? But I think the facts are, I think we can all appreciate that really data science, data analysis is hardly being taught in our current schools. And kind of the irony of it is it's being tested. So the SAT has put a lot of data analysis into it. Even in the reading section now, 10% of the questions are data related. The ACT science test is essentially all data analysis. Okay? And what's interesting is, in general, economists have found that teachers are very quick to teach to the test, that when a test tests a particular kind of material, that the curriculum very quickly follows. But for whatever reason, in terms of data, it hasn't. I've seen almost no changes in curriculum in response to either the SAT changing or the ACT changing towards increased data science. So I think it's interesting to ask why. why is it that we don't really teach data science? Well, I think the first answer is pretty obvious. Well, let me go back. Let me say one thing. So why, I'm stressing why it's so important. Why do I think it's so important? I think it's important for a number of reasons. Okay, number one, in terms of jobs. If you look at what the Department of Labor puts out as forecasts of growing jobs and indeed good, well-paying growing jobs, they overwhelmingly are STEM, of course, but even within STEM, they are intensively data-oriented. The future workplace is going to be dominated by data, if you think about it. Not just jobs that are strictly data-related, but the job of a manager has more and more become a data-related job. That good managers have to be able, even good Salesforce people are often much more highly reliant on interpretation of data in the way they do their selling. Blue-collar jobs. Think about how the auto mechanic's job has changed over time. The modern car is a computer in many ways. And what auto mechanics used to do is change dramatically as cars have changed. Okay? The future, there's no doubt the future belongs to jobs that involve data. Okay? But it's not just about jobs. I think it's also about living in modern society. Healthcare decisions, healthcare choices, with the availability of data and the complexity often of the environment in which you're asked to evaluate healthcare plans. Financial literacy, I think, is important. Civics, being able to interpret what politicians are saying and what's in the newspaper, increasingly rely on data. And I think kind of the populist movement that we've had that has elected a very anti-science, anti-intellectual president, I think all of that can be in part traced back to our inability, our ineffectiveness at teaching people about data. All right. So why don't we teach people about data? Okay. So I think there are a bunch of obvious reasons why we don't teach people currently very much about data. The first one is that data are new. We used to live in a world that had a sparseness of data, and the statistics are amazing that in the last 2 years, we've produced as much data as mankind produced in all of history prior to that. And if you think about going to the moon, the kind of computers we went to the moon and how we did that essentially almost without data, it's just it's been a revolution. It's one of the greatest changes that we've had is the rise of data. Okay, and curriculum moves slowly, and the curricula that we currently teach more or less existed 40 or 50 years ago and hasn't caught up with data. Okay? A second reason that we don't teach data is that it doesn't fit easily as a centerpiece of any one current subject. Okay, so it's adjacent to, it touches with, it improves upon virtually every subject, from biology to social sciences to statistics to physical education. I mean, you think about any history, and you could bring data into any kind of subject. But the people who teach those subjects are often not trained in data, and it really isn't the centerpiece. It's a tool, and so I think we've had a hard time thinking about where to put data. And I think a third reason we struggle with data and teaching data is that nobody really agrees what we should be teaching or how to teach it, what data science is. And I really want to, and this is super important, I want to contrast that with computer science. So unlike data science, which I think is, any push to really teach data science has failed, I think computer science has been reasonably successful at integrating into the curriculum. And partly that's because I think almost everyone can agree what we mean when we say computer program. And I think we also have a fair amount of agreement about how to computer program, how to teach computer program. Where data science, I think there's both less agreement on what the subject is, what we should be teaching, how we should be teaching it. And that creates an obvious difficulty. Okay, so all that being said, what is my recommendation? What do I believe we should try to do? So I believe we should try to integrate data science. And so I put together with Joe Bowler, who's a education professor at Stanford. We put together a big conference to bring together many leading mathematicians, high school math teachers, college level math teachers, trying to understand how to think about integrating data science into its existing curriculum. And it was a passionate group, and we met for 2 days. But I've rarely been less depressed at a conference than I was at this conference. Okay, not because we didn't have amazing people, and not because we didn't have great passion and have an important project, but because nobody agreed on what literally every person in the room had a different idea. And what struck me was that it was really, these ideas were not, while good-hearted, had no real chance of happening. Okay, so what I did learn, which I was surprised, is that many of the people who are the strongest proponents of data science have a deep, deep hatred for calculus. They think that calculus somehow in the high school curriculum has ruined everything. And they see data science as a way to knock down the preeminence of calculus. Okay, it was not my feeling at all. Like I would, if I had my brother's students who did more of all STEM, right? More science, more engineering, more everything. Okay, so I'm not thinking necessarily that we want to kill calculus, and plus it's completely implausible to try to kill calculus because the universities rely heavily on calculus, and the elite universities demand calculus, and you can't unilaterally get rid of calculus unless you get the university to say they want to get rid of it. And I've talked to presidents at universities and admissions directors at universities, and they're not willing, they're not interested in getting rid of calculus. Okay, and I don't think they should be, because calculus is important for certain paths. All right, so I think an idea that you replace calculus with data science is a total non-starter. The second common thread that I heard at the conference is that we should have separate tracks. We should have a data track and a calculus track, and we should let students diverge and have choices about that. Okay, and I actually think that's really a bad idea for two reasons. Number one, I don't see any reason to believe why students or their parents will make good choices at the age of 14 or 15 or 16 about whether they should learn a lot about data or whether they should learn about calculus. I mean, it's not that well informed, not that obvious. I'm not sure what I would have done, for instance. Secondly, I think that is just a recipe for turning data and data analysis, data science into a remedial program, a program that is only given to students who aren't thriving in a current math program. And that would be a start, but I think it's a wrong start, because I think data science is important to everyone. Literally, so when we did our study, our survey of the Freakonomics group, we asked people. These were, highly technical people, many of them STEM people, and we asked them how often they use different kinds of math, and about 11% of the people said they used algebra of some kind. 4% said they used calculus. Even less used trigonometry or geometry. But 23% of the people said on a regular basis they did data visualization. Something like 40% said that they analyzed data sets and databases. 70% roughly used Excel. That people are actually using these tools, and these are tools we should be teaching. And these are talented people, successful people who use these tools. And to think that we should make data science a remedial track just didn't make sense. The third common theme that arose when people were talking about, how we should change curriculum, was that we should have integrated math, okay, which probably is a great idea. The idea that you shouldn't teach geometry separately than algebra, separately than data, separately than calculus. We should try to put it all together and make it question-focused, which is fine, which is great. It's just the difficulty, implementation-wise, of overhauling an entire math sequence and trying to integrate it just seemed to me totally hopeless. So my team and I went back after this conference, and we just thought, is there another path? And I think we settled on found something which is really simple and straightforward and has a lot to say for itself. So here's the idea. Right now, almost every student in America, high school student, will take geometry, a year of geometry, something like that, and a year something like algebra 2. And there's a lot to like in both of those classes. But if you look carefully at them, I think even the biggest proponents of those classes would say that there's a lot of archaic material in there, that there's a lot of stuff that has been completely outdated by computers, that much of what we do in Algebra 2 is about calculations that you're never going to do in your entire life, because with a calculator in your hand or a computer around, you're never going to need to do these old style calculations. So it's like, just to contrast, if you've seen that movie Hidden Figures, there once was a time when people needed to do really hard calculations. That time ended 50 years ago, but we still teach students like it's important. Okay, so the incredibly simple solution that we're proposing, that we're pushing, is that we should take the year of geometry and the year of Algebra 2, and let's just take the high points. Let's take all the really good stuff in those two courses, and let's just combine it down into 1 year. Okay? And I think we would still give students an excellent education in geometry and Algebra 2. Maybe better, because we wouldn't have so much extraneous stuff. And that would just simply free up a year for the high achieving students, a year on the way to calculus, where we could start from scratch. We could do whatever we want. Okay, my own personal preferences, I would probably put in a bunch of data science, a little bit of statistics. I would do some computer programming, and I would do some financial literacy, and who knows what. I think, with a year, there'd be an enormous amount of space. Okay, but other people might have very different preferences, and I think whether we actually make this data science oriented or more programming, computer programming, or whatever it will be, straight statistics, I think it's got to be better than we do right now. It's got to be that the best part of computer science and data science and financial literacy are more valuable to students than the worst topics in Algebra 2 right now and in geometry. And to make this work would be incredibly simple. We've already got Algebra 2 textbooks and geometry textbooks. We just have to cut chapters out, only teach some of them. The hardest part is creating a new curriculum that incorporates whatever we would try to teach data-wise. And there are some curriculums, a really nice curriculum put together. It's called IDS, that was put together by folks at UCLA with the help of the National Science Foundation. I think we could do others. I think if you wanted to integrate financial literacy, there'd be some work to do. But I think it's worth some effort and some collaboration with publishers and some work, obviously, with the test makers, because if you aren't testing stuff, people won't teach it. But all of that, I think, goes back to the basic point that the future belongs to data, and the longer we wait, the greater risk we put ourselves at for our national competitiveness, and really for the health and well-being of the students that we're trying to do well for. Okay, let me stop there and take some questions, which I think that Kelly has been collecting here for me. Let's see what we got. So maybe I'm wrong. Kelly, maybe you didn't collect any questions for me. Can I discuss computational thinking? So I'm not sure if I could discuss computational thinking or not. I'm not sure. I'm always really nervous about talking about stuff I know less about than anyone else in the room, and this very well may fall into that category. But I was with Conrad Wolfram from Mathematica not too long ago. He was at our Stanford conference, and he presented to us a curriculum he's put together that I think he would say is based in computational thinking. And I have to say it was really, really interesting. So I don't know exactly how to characterize. So computational thinking, I guess, I don't know what people mean by it, but I think what they mean is that you've got computers. So don't teach people things don't teach humans to be bad computers. Teach humans to do the things that computers are not good at, and to think about how to use computers effectively. So, I think the idea is solid. I think the idea that we shouldn't be spending our time teaching people to be bad computers, that's very sensible. Now, look, I'm also very pragmatic in the sense that I think about what I use every day, and I think it's helpful to be like. Some people think you don't really need to be able to multiply and divide and take fractions. I disagree with that because uh, because I do think that in everyday life I use stuff like that, simple things like that, being able to take square roots all the time. But so computational thinking, as Conrad Wolfram at least envisioned it, involved a fair amount of heavy programming integrated into questions with amazing case studies. And I think he did, if you can, I'm not sure how you can find his curriculum. It's through Mathematica, obviously, which he's part of and requires Mathematica. It's been adopted in Estonia, interestingly. But so this is obviously a rambling answer, but to me, I don't think computational thinking isn't how I would organize data science. Or maybe I don't know the definition of it, but I think it's like I take that. If somebody put that in there, I'd be happy to have it in there, but it isn't the way I myself would organize it. Okay, let's take another question here. Because how do we connect the dots from all the subjects? So we discuss data science and we realize the importance of it with the real world. Most teaching occurs in silos. So how do we as educators work to include it in science, social studies, etc., more than just a chart looking data? So that is the $64 million question, the $1 billion question. How do we do that? Because I do think it's exactly right that data science lives and thrives and breathes as a tool within different disciplines. So the way I use data and analyze data in economics is very different than the way someone might use it in biology or even in psychology. So, in economics, we typically can't run randomized experiments. So we built a bunch of tools like what we call natural experiments that are attempting to kind of tease causality out of data that weren't designed to generate causality. Okay? So here are my thoughts. So the first thought is, I think without some core knowledge and teaching about how to analyze data, I think it will be a challenge to bring data into these adjacent fields. Okay, so that's why I believe that we actually need something called data science, where we teach the basic features of how to analyze data. Okay, once you've done that, okay, then I think the challenge is twofold. One is teacher training. So most of the teachers in the subjects which are adjacent to data are not well versed in using data themselves, and so I think we need to provide teachers with the tools to do that well. Okay, but I also think that's not so hard. I think that at least the evidence that I've looked at with AP Bio, okay, was that the AP Bio teachers at first, when the College Board introduced lots of data into the new curriculum, were unhappy and challenged. But within a year, there was an enormous groundswell of materials and peer support and training to help do it. The other thing we need curriculum. We need examples. We need the textbooks to be building in data, or we need outside sources. We need repositories where we have good data, and I think that's really the job of. So one thing I haven't talked about is if you think about how computer science has, I think, done a really good job of beginning to integrate into the high school curriculum. I think they've done that in part through national leadership. So groups like CS for All, which have provided a lot of the thought leadership and materials that's needed. And I would love to see something like that emerge for data science, where we actually had a group that was taking the kinds of questions you're asking today and thinking about the right answers to them and bringing the right groups of people together to try to do that. But I do think it's hard. Look, I'm sympathetic to the fact that I'm a science teacher. I'm in high school. I'm trying to teach my kids data. How do I do it? How do I do it when my students don't know anything about data? So I have to start at the beginning and when the materials are out there to make it easy for me to do so. All right, next question. How would you consider melding mathematical modeling with statistical reasoning as a core learning experience for all students? So I do believe that all students should be exposed to data science. And let me go back and I didn't say so. So maybe one of the criticisms that people who are listening would want to say, look, you're acting like the only reason that we teach people stuff in school is because it's useful. Like you keep on saying people use data science all the time. But the purpose of high school isn't necessarily to teach people a set of skills like Excel that they can use on the job. It's to give them a worldview, a way of thinking. It's to teach them, we teach algebra and geometry because it's beautiful, because it changes the way you view the world, it inspires you. Okay, so let me say I don't disagree with that much of what we teach in school, whether it's history or algebra or geometry, you might never use again, but it can have other purposes in terms of brain development, in terms of inspiration. But I also believe that just because we use data doesn't mean that it can't be as brain developing and as inspirational as other more arcane topics. Okay, so I do believe every student deserves a shot to learn about data, and I do believe that we can connect better with many students through data than not through data. One of the examples that I did a Freakonomics radio podcast, and one of the examples of a professor that I interviewed who had taught 8th grade math at a low-income school, and she tried to bring in data in various ways. And one of the things she did, she told the story about one of her students, probably the worst student in the class. So this student whose only engagement with her was the student would repeatedly ask if she couldn't give this teacher a makeover because she was like so poorly put together and she wanted to help her look better. So they did a data project where every student got to choose a topic. And this student chose her topic. She wanted to analyze the quality of various, I think it was eyeshadows. And so she, in a very meticulous, data-oriented way, went through a range of eyeshadows and evaluated their quality. And it was the one time that the student engaged with coursework the entire year. So I do believe that that data are good entree into getting people engaged. Okay, so how to engage mathematical modeling and statistical reasoning? Again, I don't know, maybe not the question that I can give you, that I'm not the best one to give you an answer to. I think there are different approaches to it. So the approach that I use with my student is, and these are up to university level students, is I like to first talk about theory, not about a theory. My own view is I like to put all of the theories on the table. Okay, so I have a slightly different approach to modeling than many people. Many people follow reasonably like the scientific method, which is to propose a theory and then to try to propose a hypothesis and then try to test that hypothesis with data. And then you can't obviously prove a theory, but you can disprove it. I actually teach a different way with my students. I like to try and come up with every possible plausible theory that a reasonable person could hold. And then I like to think about the predictions of each of those theories and try to understand then how do I distinguish between competing theories? Because in economics, unlike much in science, it's usually not just like a single theory or a theory that we have and then a theory that will beat it. There's often, a bunch of theories about how the world works. And in economics, I don't know, you might call it like a partial identification is the words we use for it. But I think in that world, it's a different modeling approach than you would take in another setting where you want to do something more like the scientific method. So what I do with my students is I then try to give them a pile of data, and I say, among these 5 theories, what do you think the data support the best? Okay? And what almost always happens in messy social science data is that there'll be hopefully 4, 5, 6 predictions across different theories, and 3 of the theories might all agree. So almost every economic theory is going to say that demand slopes downward, and so that won't distinguish between theories, but it is a prediction of all the theories. And so what they usually find in the data is that, one theory, maybe 4 of the 6 predictions is borne out, and another theory, only 2 of the 6 predictions are borne out. Okay? And so the kind of inference you draw in a messy world is very different than the kind of inference you would draw in a world in which you can, in chemistry, have predictions that, the ratio of molecules should be exactly, 2 hydrogens for every oxygen. There, I would take a different approach. So I don't think there's one size fits all, but I do agree with the principle that the integration of a modeling approach, of thinking about how the world works from a theoretical perspective, and then wedding that to actual data and how the data fit is an incredibly important endeavor. All right, so next question. Why wait until Algebra 2? Why not start at grade 9 when students are beginning high school studies so we reach all students? So you're totally right. And let me go even further. Why start at grade 9? We actually have put together a list of going all the way to kindergarten of incremental steps you can take to introduce students to data all the way K through 12. So I certainly think that's right. Now, just to be clear, by melding geometry and algebra 2, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't teach data until, say, junior year. So you bought yourself a year. It could be any year. So yeah, absolutely. I think that you could bring data science in. I think it's a really good idea. Look, my own belief is if you let me be czar, education czar, dictator, whatever, I would bring data in from the beginning, and I do it intensively, and I would make it the focus of many things. Okay. In terms of realities of how we do it, I think the Algebra 2 geometry is a good, realistic way to get it done. Okay, but I didn't make clear. You could then make data science like a 9th grade math class, and then do Algebra 2 and geometry in 10th grade or 11th grade. It depends how you're going to do pre-calc and stuff. Okay, but absolutely, look, the more, the better, the earlier. And look, I'm happy for
in your bag. On the table. It's definitely not in that bag.
And I'm happy to let people say that I'm wrong and that we should be introducing data science some other way. I certainly don't think I have any monopoly on the right way to introduce data science. What are the current policies? Next question. What are the current policies that you implement and suggest to engage students to take STEM courses? What's your policy recommendation adapted by your country? Was it successful? So I think incentives matter. I'm an economist, and obviously economists think that incentives matter. And when I think about policies that sorry, I'm distracted. I don't know if other people have. I had noise, but I'm getting noise. Kelly, I don't know if there's anything you can do about that. So how do you engage students? So look, to take STEM courses, you need to have incentives. Okay, and right now we have very weak incentives because we hardly test STEM courses, right? So to get into college, the emphasis is on reading and math, and a particular kind of math. And I think that the more we would make high stakes testing, to the extent they're going to rely on high stakes testing, if you have high stakes testing for a broader set of STEM classes, you would have greater incentives to do it. So in terms of how our policy recommendations, so we've made policy recommendations, and I think we're having a certain amount of traction, not very much, but a little bit of traction until COVID hit. I think COVID has been a real detriment to most change in education. So I think there a lot of good changes will come from the reaction to COVID, because I think reorganizing the classroom and learning what we can about remote learning and reorganizing how we do things, even when we're back in person, using the lessons from COVID will be important. But in terms of other kinds of changes to curriculum, I think the bandwidth and the tolerance of school leadership and of government to take on more changes mean that it's really until COVID is gone, or at least under control, I think there will be a lot of difficulty in getting many changes at all to what we're trying to do in terms of STEM. Another question: should we move towards creating a separate data science school subject or integrate it, for example, in subjects such as physics? So I take whatever we can get. Anyone who can figure out how to get this in, data science in, I would take it. My own view is that it's hard to integrate because it's just, I don't see the obvious place to integrate it, would be my, statistics is the obvious place to integrate it, but it doesn't really do any good to integrate with statistics because nobody takes statistics at the high school level anyway. So among the subjects we teach, so for instance, my feeling is that physics is not the right place. It just doesn't feel like the right place to me, because physics, at least as I see my high school students being taught it, is completely and totally theoretical. There's like zero data component. It doesn't seem natural at all, and it doesn't. I think physics teachers might not be the most natural ways to attach it. But look, if there was a school district that said, "Hey, I think physics is a great way to attach data science. Let's take half of physics or a third of physics and make it a data science class," I think that'll be fine. Okay, again, I think it's not ideal because physics comes so late in the career. Comes in almost always in the 12th grade. In many ways, I honestly think it wouldn't be completely crazy to rethink how we do the social sciences, social studies, history, and to think about attaching data science there. I think just like math has not kept up with developments in the world, I think social science teaching in high school has not kept up. The fact that we have such a strong emphasis on history as opposed to on economics or even political science or various data-related social sciences, I think that wouldn't be a crazy place to try to integrate data science as well. Next question. Do you think that it is necessary for data science to be included in the curriculum of high school education? Will that enable our teachers and learners, high school, will that enable our teachers and learners to understand better the different sciences? So I absolutely do. I just feel like there's very little else as important in day-to-day life, managing day-to-day life, as not to be a data scientist. I'm not saying everyone's got to be a data scientist. I'm just watching people around me. Like I have a nanny, and when I'm like quizzing my 16-year-old kids and my nanny about data, like simple things about interpreting what we're seeing around us, and I see them struggle, and I just wonder how they can make good decisions in life when they don't understand the basics. I mean, they can call people who understand the basics, but it just really strikes me as fundamental. It's as fundamental to me in the modern days of reading and being able to do, multiplication tables, is to be able to have some ability to make sense of data, some ability to make a graph or to to understand the difference between correlation and causality. So let me stop there on what I was going to bring, and let me end with a story. So I feel like somehow I've cast a very negative net. First with my example about this retailer who didn't know how to do data, and I keep on saying, oh, it's so hard to implement stuff. But let me be aspirational as an end to this presentation, and let me tell you a story where I've seen the power of data science and of STEM more generally. Okay, so the story starts with a conference not too different than this. It's the same kind of people showed up to the conference. It was live in Chicago at the Peninsula Hotel. And in the Q&A session, somebody asked me what I was working on. And this is 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And it turned out I just started a project collecting data on street prostitutes in the city of Chicago. And so along with a sociologist, we had put trackers out with clipboards out on the street corners where the prostitutes were working, and we paid them a little bit of money, and they would just, each time they did a trick, we'd record a bunch of information on it. Okay, but that's not actually the point of the story. It was an interesting study. For instance, we learned that Chicago police officers were more likely to have sex with an on-duty, prostitutes were more likely to have sex with an on-duty police officer than they were to be arrested by an on-duty police officer. Okay, but that's not the point of the story. The story is that one of the people in the audience that day was in from out of town, and he wanted to experience some of what Chicago had to offer. And so he had hired a call girl. And when he showed up, it turns out, I found out later, when he showed up at her apartment where she did her tricks, my book Freakonomics was sitting out on the coffee table and told her to make conversations. And oh my God, I just met the author of that book today, and he's doing a study. He's collecting data on prostitution in Chicago. So much to my amazement, the next day I got an email, and it came from this call girl, and she said, "Oh, I understand you're doing this project on collecting data on prostitution, and I'm a high-priced call girl in the city of Chicago, and I've collected an enormous amount of data on my Palm Pilot on all the clients that I've ever served. Are those the kind of data that you had hoped to collect?" And I wrote her back immediately, and I said, "Absolutely, that's the kind I'd love to have your Palm Pilot data." So we met for brunch, and we sat down, and here's where the story gets even more interesting. It turns out that prior to being a call girl, this woman had studied computer science in a university, and she had actually worked as a computer programmer in the U.S. military on the Star Wars defense system. She went to work at a Fortune 50 company as a computer programmer, and she was making about $80,000 a year doing that. And she just decided that being a prostitute would be a better life. And so she took her STEM training and she put it to use. She built her own web page. It's 15 years ago when it wasn't that easy to do and people didn't do it that much. And she started her business. And when I met her, she just could not have been happier. She was making about $200,000 to $300,000 a year, working something like 15 to 20 hours a week as a call girl. And she was just effusive about her life change. So I began to, here we were, we talked about getting her data, and it actually was pretty simple to figure out how to de-identify her data and whatnot. It only took about 15 minutes, but here we were sitting at brunch, and I'm kind of awkward in general. I didn't know what I was going to talk to her about. So I just started asking her all the questions that I was asking CEOs, like I asked the CEOs of retail, just like, I'd learned to kill time by asking people lots of questions. And plus I really wanted to learn more about prostitution. I didn't know that much about it. And she really told me, honestly, gave me better answers to most of my questions about the economics of the business than did most of the CEOs I talked to. But I finally tripped her up when I asked her how she set her prices. And she said, well, I didn't really know what to charge. I just kind of went on the internet. I looked at what other women were charging, and some were charging $100 and some were charging $500. So I just decided I'd charge in the middle $300. And that's really so agitating to economists, because like the one thing that economists think we're good at is knowing how to set prices, and we have simple formulas called the inverse elasticity rule, where if you know if you know your marginal cost, you know the elasticity of demand, you know exactly what to charge. And it's a pretty easy problem to go and try to experiment to figure that out. But nobody does. Almost nobody does that. Even in business, people don't do that. So then I was just thinking about, could I give her advice about her price? And she had told me she had this dedicated phone line that only her clients called her on. And so I asked her, well, when the phone rings with your client calling you, how does it feel? She said, oh, well, sometimes I'm excited, but a lot of times, I don't even pick it up. I'm just not in the mood really. And so I'm kind of indifferent. And I'm like, my God, you're a local monopolist. If you're optimally pricing, you got a downward sloping demand curve. So you have a huge markup. You should be so excited when the phone rings. Like the best sound in the world should be your phone ring. She looked at me confused, and I'm sure I didn't explain it very well at the time. The logic, I didn't explain it very well this time either. But then I just came back to my senses, and I realized, look, I'm not here to maximize her profits. I'm just trying to get access to her Palm Pilot. So we parted ways. I didn't think I'd see her again, but I teach a course on economics of crime at the University of Chicago, and because I was studying prostitution, I decided to add a new lecture. And as I tried to write that lecture, I just realized it was really hard. I was really struggling in writing that lecture. And suddenly I had an epiphany. I said, well, why don't I call my new prostitute friend and have her come guest lecture to the university students for me? So I called her. I said, hey, Professor Levitt, how would you feel about coming in and teaching my lecture for me down at the U of C? She said, oh, no, I couldn't do that. I'm a very private person, and I'm a terrible public speaker. I really couldn't do that. And the thing is, I know enough about prostitutes and economics that we have something in common, which is that in the end, it's really all about price, right? It's like for the right price, we'll do anything. And so I said, well, what if I charged you? What if I paid you your hourly wage to come down and teach my lecture? I said, oh, I misunderstood. I thought for my hourly wage, I'd love to come teach the class. Just tell me whenever it is. I'll be glad to do it. So we arranged it, and she came down, and she gave the most amazing lecture to my undergrads. She was thoughtful. She was analytical, and people loved it. And literally a third of all the students in my class told me later that it was the single best lecture that they had received in their entire 4 years at the University of Chicago, which is a pretty sad statement about what me and my colleagues are doing in the classroom. But after she gave her lecture, we did Q&A. And one of the students raised his hand and said, well, how much do you charge? And she said, well, I charge $400 an hour. Okay, and I became so irate because I knew she charged $300 an hour, and then I had hired her for 2 hours, and I very carefully put 6 crisp $100 bills into an envelope with a nice thank you card for her. And then she told the class that she charges $400. It's lies to the class and says she charges $400 an hour. I'm furious because it's not like I can use grant money to do this. I couldn't go to the National Science Foundation and say, hey, I'm too lazy to teach my own lecture, so I hired a prostitute to do it. Can you give me $800? It's literally coming out of my pocket is $800. And it was just so aggravating, too, that I felt like we had this relationship of trust, and then she completely violates my trust and lies to the students. But I still felt like I had to. If she said she earns $400 an hour, and I told her I'd pay her hourly wage, I have to give her $800. And so anyway, I was so angry, fuming in the side of the room that she's ripping me off like that. And then the next student raised her hand and said, well, how did you decide how much to charge? And she looks at me, and she has this big beaming smile on her face. And she says, well, I used to charge $300 an hour. And then the very first time I was with Professor Levitt, he convinced me my services were far more valuable than the $300 I was charging. He suggested I should raise my prices. And so I did, and I ran a little experiment, and I raised my prices. And it turned out that my revenue went way up when I raised my prices, that my demand was extremely inelastic. And so I tell you, meeting Professor Levitt was the most important thing that's ever happened to me in terms of business. So look, I don't know if what's the message of that? The message is everybody deserves to be taught the power of STEM, the power of data. And if you can use those skills to increase your profits in prostitution, you should be able to use those skills in everything. Thank you so much. Have a great conference. Let's all work together to make STEM central to the lives of everyone in America and the world. Take care.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephen, for that. I mean, it was just great to hear Dr. Levitt's perspective. So I just want to welcome everyone to the summit. And I just want to thank you for your participation and joining us. So I wanted to give a little bit of history because for many of you, this might be something new here. And I will have to tell you right off the bat, this is new for us, right? We never thought that we would be in this global pandemic and dealing with the situation. So we're going to make this engaging. There's a lot of learning here. But I first wanted to start with a little bit of the history about the STEM Leadership Alliance Summit. And I think this context is really important because a group of visionaries actually came together to really think about what is STEM. And when we started to engage in this conversation, we felt that STEM was an acronym. It was this word that was being thrown around, but what did it really mean? And so as we started to do a deeper dive and engage in a conversation, the importance of integrating STEM across all subjects areas was really important. STEM should not just lie within the sciences. Science certainly should be the hook, but really what it should be about is having those connections where science brings in mathematics and not just as this histograms or measurement, but something so much more and so much more meaningful. And that technology should not just be a tool or a device, but technology should really have a purpose to thinking about community problems, community issues. How do I think about what I need to solve for? And then when we think about engineering, it shouldn't just be a project. Engineering should really be, it should be solving those problems. It should be pulling all of this together. But the real magic happens with STEM when you start connecting that to literacy. You connect that to history. You connect that to art and to other subjects there so that it becomes a holistic approach and that students aren't saying, well, why am I learning this? There's no relationship there. But really starting to think, there's these connections. So that's what I want to really emphasize is that the whole goal and purpose of what we're trying to do here today is to break down those silos. You're going to be hearing from leaders across the board around STEM education, and they're going to bring a perspective that's unique to their mindset, to their area of passion and commitment that they have. But the magic happens is when you take all of this learning, you create those connections and you bring it back to your environment. So you need to think about, how do I take the learnings from this virtual setting and start to apply this, share this with my colleagues, and really start to bring this to the next level here. So in a few moments, you're going to be hearing from Steve Barbados, and Steve Barbados is going to talk about, he's the executive director from ITEA, and he's going to talk about those 3 principles. So we're going to be engaging in this conversation, and you're going to start to see these connections happening where we bring in David Barnes, who's going to talk about the mathematics. We're going to hear from one of our science gurus, Christina Royce. And then we're also going to have the opportunity to hear from ASEE, Geraldine Gooding and her colleagues as they talk about the engineering and bringing it to this higher ed experience. But here's what I want to say is when all of these people come together and they start to focus on integrated STEM, it becomes the magic and starts to turn around from being just science, technology, engineering, and math and being conducted in a siloed approach, but rather that we're starting to see the synergy happening together. The other part that I really want to share is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to think of this in terms of phenomena-based learning and taking that, because that can lead to project-based, and then it gets students to figure out the problems that are happening there. So when we talk about this, we need to think about how do we get students to ooh and ah and wonder and get excited about the world around them. And the only way that we can actually do that is when we start to connect the learning. So that's the challenge there. That's what we're really trying to push for all of you, is to engage in a deeper level of thinking, that it's no longer just about starting in the middle school area or the high school area. This is about starting with all students at an early onset. We start from pre-K, we move it into elementary, middle school, high school, and then on to college. So thinking about this across the board here. And the other part too, that we have to challenge ourselves when we're listening to the presenters today, is this blended learning model. We don't know what the school system is going to look like. So here in the US, when school starts back in the next month or two, we don't know what it's going to look like. In many countries around the world, we're facing the same problem here. The audience we have here today, we have over 45 US states represented. We have over 15 countries represented. Yet what makes this so unique is that we're all facing similar problems here. So there's a few things that I actually want to highlight that you're able to do. So there is this whole place that is called the lounge that you will see. And there's a various amount of tables that you'll see sitting there. Now, throughout the day, we have provided some networking opportunities. And we want to encourage you to go to the lounge, to grab a seat at one of the tables, and engage with some of your colleagues. Because you could actually have a conversation about, how are you doing this remote learning or blended learning? What worked for you? What didn't work for you? Because the articles that came out about remote learning really showcased that we weren't doing enough. So the lounge is a place where you could have that kind of conversation. You could have a conversation around STEM. You could have a conversation around what are you doing in terms of mathematics, data science, as we just heard. But it starts to engage you in a level of conversations there. I also want to encourage you to visit the various booths. The booths are our sponsors, our partners, our learning partners, our corporate partners. You're going to be able to hear and see and meet with them as well. And I really want to thank all of our presenters, and we have over 60 presenters, 55 sessions. It's an amazing undertaking. And this would not have been possible without three other very special people who you are not necessarily seeing, but they are behind the scenes, they're backstage, and they're really helping to run the show. And that's, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Sal Fernandez for just being a thought partner on this and to helping to organize everything. I also want to thank Roy Harris and Rosa Lagana. I really could not have done that without all of you. And again, I want to thank all of our presenters, and mostly I want to thank all of you. So the audience, we have over 500 people that have registered so far for this summit. The messages keep coming in. And again, we want to continue to encourage this, not to just be a one-time summit that's occurring this week, but really making this where it's an engaging session that continues through the entire week. So I want to also back up for a moment. So I mentioned the lounge, I mentioned the booths. We also have the lobby, the floor plan. You can kind of see what's going on. So you're going to be able to join the sessions. You're going to be able to participate in some of the tables that I talked about. But now I want to move to the right side. So on the right side of the screen, you'll see discuss, and it occurs with three little bubbles there. So discuss or chat. I want to encourage you to use that button to be able to making sure that you're asking questions, that you're making some comments there, because we're going to be sharing this information. And maybe you have some great resources that you know about, and we want to be able to share that. So I encourage you to always visit the STEMleadershipalliance.org website, because we're going to take a lot of that information that you're sharing, and we're going to put it on our website to share as well. So again, we want to continue to make sure that we're having those conversations there. So I want to share just a little bit more about what's happened in this last year. So last year when the STEM Leadership Alliance Summit met, we actually met in Orlando, Florida. And that was the kickoff of something that really started to transform the conversation and the dialogue. What happened was that you had major leaders in STEM education from around the world that came together and started to say, we shouldn't be doing this in silos, as I mentioned early on. And they actually had some magic that happened. They started to connect the dots and created these integrated lessons, and they were able to share them with the participants. And all of a sudden, we started to see the light bulb come on. So educators were able to participate in things like making a roller coaster, for example. A roller coaster that all of a sudden connected science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but it also went one step further. Why not have someone who designs roller coasters be part of that conversation? Why not bring the career pathways in? So again, we want to encourage everyone to think about it, not just within school, but the out of school component too. And this is something you can also do in a remote learning platform. It's not where it just has to be the educator up front having that conversation. There's ways to bring in other partners, to bring in other resources that could be extremely valuable for your students. So we want to think about that. So as we moved away from the summit, we actually, and I need to give a shout out to our Philippines affiliate there, they did an incredible job with the guidance from the Unilab Foundation with Lilybeth. And then you're going to hear from one of the participants and leaders, I should say, of the summit, the organizers of the summit later on today. I want to give them a shout out because we moved the summit into the Philippines. And so it's hard to believe not so long ago that we were in Cebu and enjoying the summit there. And we had over 13 Asian countries that were participating in our Asia summit. And to watch that STEM integration concept shift, not just in the US, but now starting to move in a global manner there. And so again, they were able to take it. We were able to hear from leaders from all over the world that talked about that STEM needs to be more than just this acronym, but it needs to be this level of engagement there. And so again, we're going to push this conversation. We're going to challenge our thinking. We're going to have some little breaks here and there for the networking. And we're going to take the summit that we've done now, and we're going to move the needle because all of you, I'm putting a challenge out. I want you to take the work from here. I want you to think about how you're going to put it into practice, and I want to hear from you. Our entire team, as I mentioned, with Sal and Rosa and Roy, we want to hear back from you, and we want to be able to use this as an exemplar. If you're doing some great things in terms of remote learning and related to STEM, let's hear from you. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank the entire team for helping this. The 10 times team has been remarkable there. So as you have questions, remember to use the chat, but visit the lounge, visit the lobby. We're going to have a lot of network connections there. And I just want to take a couple moments here to share just a couple brief videos. There's some great work that's happening out there, and I really want to be able to share that with all of you. So first, just bear with me here because as we all are, we're learning on how to use all these new technology platforms, but here we go. I'm going to share. And there we go.
Maintaining and operating infrastructure that brings people warmth, comfort, and light. Our company is PSEG, which is Public Service Enterprise Group. What we do is we provide electricity and natural gas to millions of New Jerseyans. I like to think of us as a company that is responsible for building and maintaining and operating infrastructure that brings people warmth, comfort, and light. But the end game is always the same. It's basically to allow people to live the lifestyle they want to.
Kalaloa Partners is reliable.
Kalaloa Partners is efficient.
We are producing approximately 20% of Oahu's electricity annually. We are burning the refinery's waste oil, and we can also burn biofuels and gas if made available to us. Our efficiency is approximately 44% versus conventional plants that are in the low 30% range.
Kalaloa Partners is here to stay.
Bear with me one moment. All right. I want to thank everyone, and we're going to give you a few moments here to become a little bit more familiar with kind of what's going on around us here. So I want to encourage everyone to test out the lounge. This is a great networking opportunity, and so you can start to meet some of the other participants there. I also want you to just kind of get used to the floor a little bit. So this is, it's a little bit challenging here, but we want to try to make this a really real experience. And I think, we came into this whole COVID crisis here and this whole pandemic of what's been going on. We were a little bit unsure. And I think this is a way that we still can virtually connect, network, and meet other people. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to go right ahead. So, all right. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. That was the backstage, and that was my fault there. See, we're all learning together. So again, we're going to just take a couple-minute break here, and I want you to encourage to, if you need to get a cup of coffee, or maybe it's the end of the day for you someplace else, and you might get a cup of tea. But we're going to still show a couple videos, but I want to encourage you to also use the lounge and try some of these other new features. And we're going to be getting started back here at 9:30 on the dot. And you do not want to miss these presentations. And I'm telling you here, we have an all-star lineup. It's going to be hard. So we're trying to factor in some breaks, and so you can and even have a lunch there too, or a dinner. But I encourage you to just participate as much as you possibly can. I think you're going to really get a lot out of this. So with that, I want to thank you, and I'm going to go ahead and just share another video here.
Eyes, ears, nose, mouth, hands. Experience drives the imagination to places wonderful, joyful, and mysterious. By seeing, feeling, and touching what is, we picture what isn't yet. And then questions flash, gears turn, pencils fly, imaginations explode. Because we're inspired to figure out, to invent, to create, and maybe, just maybe, to make the world a better place. Museum of Science.
There you have it. All right, so let's just take about a 10-minute break, everyone, and we're going to get started back shortly here. But let's go to the lounge and let's see who we can network and some of the other folks that we can actually meet. This is great. There's already some people sitting over there, so you can actually grab a seat. Table 1, table 3 is actually full there. But hop on over and let's just see what we can find, or who we can find, I should say.